Welcome, everyone. We are delighted you've joined us this evening for the first ever Books for a Better World. I am Jamia Wilson, the incoming interim CEO of Faith and Public Life. We know that the world of books opens doors to new ideas. When I was a kid, the library was the most magical place that I knew. But consider this, in just the last 9 months, school districts in 26 states have banned or are considering banning more than 1,100 books. 1,100 books. Banned books include Toni Morrison's Beloved, Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Clearly, it's more important than ever that we support and celebrate authors who bring diverse ideas, opinions, and experiences to adults, teens, and children everywhere. And this is why we're here. This evening, we're delighted to bring you 12 authors and multi-faith activists who you will meet during 4 panels. We're looking forward to their lively conversations and the questions they have for one another. After each panel, each author has generously donated a signed copy of their book, which we'll be raffling off to some of you. Books for a Better World is brought to you by Auburn Seminary, Middle Collegiate Church, and Faith and Public Life in partnership with the renowned Strand Books and its famous 18 miles of books. You can purchase every book here this evening at the Strand online. And yes, that is a not so subtle hint. To get us started, a brief introduction from the Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis, Senior Minister of Middle Collegiate Church and author of the recently released Fierce Love, A Bold Path to Ferocious Courage and Rule-Breaking Kindness That Can Heal the World. We'll be giving away signed copies of a couple of Reverend Jackie's books later in our program too. So let's hear from her via video.
Hey everybody, I'm Jackie Lewis. I'm the Senior Minister here at Middle Collegiate Church, and I'm excited to welcome you to this program this evening, Books for a Better World. Delighted to do this in partnership with our colleagues who are authors and activists and change makers, who will open a door, a window into their souls, into their points of view by the words that they put on the page. In this crazy hot mess time in our nation, where polarization and violence and anger and vitriol are so much more the norm than civility and conversation, I think reading matters. It opens up our hearts to see the perspective of another. It teaches us new lands and languages and cultures. So thank you for coming today. I hope that you find a new author to follow, that you find a book that you didn't know existed, that for you and your children, this will be an amazing adventure tonight, that we will be on a journey together to new languages, to new perspectives, to changed hearts and minds, to collaborating on making America, on making our world a loving, just, and beautiful place. A place filled with fierce love, a place blessed by each of our individual personalities and particularities, a place that is just and welcoming and peaceful for all of us. Welcome, and thanks for coming.
Now, for our first group of authors who will share thoughts on who is America, Wajahat Ali is an author, playwright, and columnist for the New York Times and Daily Beast, and one of the funniest public intellectuals on news, politics, and as he says, all things Muslimy. He's author of the brilliantly titled Go Back to Where You Came From and other helpful recommendations on how to become American. Dr. Robin Henderson Espinoza is author of the groundbreaking Body Becoming, A Path to Our Liberation. And Sister Simone Campbell, our #1 nun on the bus, inspires hope with her award-winning Hunger for Hope, prophetic, sorry folks, my window caught out there. #1 nun on the bus, her award-winning Hunger for Hope, prophetic communities, contemplation, and the common good. Take it away, Sister Simone.
Oh, great. Thanks, Janae. What a treat for us to be together to have this conversation. I've been really looking forward to it. And I guess I wanted to ask each of you to start with maybe a story from writing the book because once the book gets between two covers, we think that was all that happened. But I wonder, did you have a new insight, a new experience, something that surprised you in the process of writing your book? I don't know, do Robin or Waj, do either of you have a story for this?
I'm happy to start.
Oh,
You
great,
know,
thanks.
books are a mystery, I think, to me, certainly, because, what I proposed was to write about embodiment. And what I ended up writing was my reflection on how the democratic body is disassociated and disembodied, because I was watching it unfold and break down before my eyes. And I paralleled that with my own history of getting into my body and leaving academia and walking into my therapist's office and saying, how do I have a relationship with my body? But for me, it was like real time of like, oh, how do we heal the wounds of our society when it's falling apart in front of our eyes?
Amen.
You know,
Watch, that seems like it kind of relates. I started your book and I'm in the middle of it, so I haven't finished the end of it, but it seems like there's a connection there with your reflection on your own lived experience. Is that true?
yeah, so I mean, the prompt is so fascinating, right? Who is America? And I think, the question is, how do you love a country that doesn't love you back? And how do you emerge as a co-protagonist of a narrative, of an evolving an American narrative, which has either seen you as a villain, or as a sidekick, or as a punchline, or has excised you completely, or as we're speaking today, banning you. And that also shows you the power of the story, right? And specifically the power of the story of the rest of us. A story is so powerful that depending upon who writes it and who's the co-protagonist, it triggers, if you will, the collective economic anxiety of some folks, where they feel like they have to ban a book because they hold on so desperately to this myth, this fiction, this toxic fiction, that America is only for one protagonist. But God forbid, if our stories come out there, our simple inclusion or our simple request to simply be co-protagonist to them is replacement. And I think in the process of writing it, to go back to also your first question, yes, there's a healing in writing. There's a way, especially when you write a book and you share your personal stories, human beings are storytelling animals. So to put your life through a narrative arc and to connect the dots can be very therapeutic. And what I found out in this particular journey, go back to where you come from, and other helpful recommendations on how to become American. Those are some of the very lovely, by the way, unsolicited emails I get every day, Simone. Go back to your country. And I was like, okay, Fremont, California, the Bay Area, I would love to if you could pay the rent. Or if you want to go Freudian, let's say the womb. You want to go back to the womb? Great. And some folks care only about the kids who are in the womb, but I digress. In this particular process, though, I want to say this for those who are listening and those who are thinking about becoming writers or writing books. I will say this. Many of us oftentimes say the following: who am I? I'm nobody. Why will my story matter? There's 8 billion people. There's so many books out there. I'm just a fill in the blank. And what I found out is, by writing the story and now seeing the response and reaction to the story, even though I'm a son of Pakistani Muslim immigrants, born and raised in California, I've only spoke 3 phrases of English, and I'm left-handed, and I talk about the trials and tribulations of my family. The universal is found in the specific, and what we take for granted, the richness of our lives, we take for granted as being like, oh, no one's going to care about this silly specificity or that silly story. That's what resonates. And not only does it resonate with a global diverse audience, so many people say, I did not know that. I did not think about that. Thank you for sharing your story. I was able to walk in your shoes. And going back to Robin's point, I'll end it. We have work to do. We don't live in a post-racial society. I never thought about the war on terror and how it affected Muslims. Oh, that's what it's like to have a funny name or an accent. I can work on myself. We still have work to do. So it's a therapeutic process, but it's also a transformative process as well.
I think that that last piece about having work to do was really a powerful experience for me as I was writing my book. I was doing, these rural roundtables around the country. And what I discovered in these conversations were with rural communities that were really fairly hostile to urban folks and felt very judged and angry about how urban folks treat rural people. And I will never forget this one woman telling me that, you know, in the city, when you go to a protest, you think it's really great and you show up, but there's no personal consequence. In our small town, if we show up, there's consequences. We're not conservative. We're careful about our relationships. And it was that relational piece that really got me thinking about how do we, whether it's urban or rural, then promote relationships that are reverent enough to acknowledge our bodies as maybe you might say, Robin, but that we are embodied and different and therefore sacred. And so in my book, when I had this aha moment, what I tried to do was put questions at the end of the chapters just to encourage people's reflections, because it is a way of going deeper into your own work. I know I found the questions helpful. Hopefully others will too. But it was an effort at creating that dialogue, because I always want to hear the rest of the story. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. How about for you, Robin? You're doing such critical work around body and body awareness. And I'm wondering, how do you see that in relationship with our theme, Who is America? How does that fit for you?
Well, I think it's relationships all the way down. And I think, when we begin to kind of parse out the logic of whiteness, we learn that whiteness is rooted in a relationality of transactions, which is why so many of us are harmed by capitalism, for example. And so I was deeply invested in trying to write and translate philosophy and theory and theology into story about generative relationships and the ways in which my own upbringing as a Mexican American, spending my summers in Mexico, deeply shaped me in how I understand relationships and how I understand friendship. I always find it fascinating that people will say, hi, friend, and there's no context for friendship. And that there's a lot of people that assume intimacy, but there's no praxis of friendship. So for me, it's relationships all the way down. And I believe, I believe that we can be and should be a robust, cosmopolitan, different society. There's a lot of people who don't believe that, who are trying to force Christian hegemony and Christofascism onto our society, right? But I believe deeply that these relationships of difference, I think, it's hard to hate people over good food. So can we start eating together again? Which is some of the work that I'm trying to return to doing. Let's eat together. Let's get to know one another, because I guarantee you that we have similar values, but we've been conscripted into these ideological wars, which is why we're so polarized, and we end up domesticating polarization because of a lack of relationship. And I think when we return to relationship and generative relationship, I think we deal with how so many of us have disassociated from our bodies. The logic of whiteness, it stewards disassociation from the body. And so when we begin to repair that within ourselves, it repairs us interpersonally in our interpersonal relationships. And those interpersonal relationships then shape and shift our collective body or our cultural body, or dare I say, our democratic body. And so, why do we need religious pluralism? Because that difference accelerates flourishing for all of us, not just for me, not just for folks who practice Islam, but for all of us.
Oh, that's really great. Can I just ask a follow-up question? I'm curious. I found writing really kind of lonesome. Did you find a way to make it interactional, or
Well,
did
you
you
know,
have a
I
writing group?
I was writing during the pandemic and I was deeply searching for a writing group. And thankfully, in Nashville, which is where I live with my partner and my two cats, there is a writers collective called The Porch. And I love a good front porch and happy to be on the front porch with folk. So I joined classes through The Porch. And so I was with community, I was with other people who were writing. I wasn't workshopping any of my work. I was just like listening, and because
Right.
I was trained, I'm a one-trick pony. I was trained to be a theologian and ethicist. I sort of stay in my lane. It was very lonely because I couldn't find a writing group, but I would take classes through this writers collective. And then the one thing that I did, you talked about, you added questions at the end of your chapters. The one thing I did in my book, because I'm very cautious of the danger of the single story or the single narrative. And as someone, who is ordained and has a PhD, I'm always very concerned about how do I steward that power and access. And so I invited folks to contribute vignettes around their own history with their body, their own history with embodiment, their own history of living in the world. And I collected like 10 or 12 vignettes from people all over the country and Canada to talk about embodiment. And that's kind of how I brought community into this book so that we could rethink bodies and
Yeah.
becoming.
What a great way to do it. Well, Waj, how about you? How'd you do your process? Because I saw on Twitter you announced you were disappearing to write your book at one point, and then you would report in how far you were.
Yeah, no, I can't disappear. I have 3 children, ages 7, 5, and 2. So, I'm like, oh, hey, children, I'm going to go write this book. They're like, we don't care. Build us this Lego set. And so I think oftentimes in life, you have to find and make the time to do things you need to do, even though you don't have the time, right? Like all of us. And so I made a commitment to finish it, and I did, and I was very lucky. And I'll quickly just say this. The power of the story, right? The story of America oftentimes that has been imposed upon us is the story of whiteness and white supremacy. It's a toxic narrative that will poison the body politics, right? Because we are a multiracial democracy.
Amen.
That's the truth of it. And the intention behind the book, and I'm listening to Dr. Robin and you, Simone, I think our intention is we're telling our specific story, but our specific story is told with the intention of hopefully healing the nation and expanding and stretching the story of America to accommodate the narratives that have been excised, to add other co-protagonists. That is the intention. So you can find the universal in the specific. And I think that's a type of thread that we have throughout our works, even though we come from so many different backgrounds, that, okay, I'm not interested in a melting pot. I don't want to melt into anybody. I want you to retain your original form. I like a salad. Let's all be a salad. But what you need that distinct feature. You need your voice. And the thing I'll say this before I ask you a question, Sister Simone, is if you aren't writing your story, always remember in America, your story is being written for you by others. And so I again want to stress this, that many who are listening right now, they're like, oh, Sister Simone wrote it, Robin wrote it, Waj wrote it. Who am I? I'm nobody. Some of my favorite people are nobody. In fact, I'm a nobody. But there is a power in telling your story. It could transform your life. It could transform your life. So please, if you haven't thought about it, put the pen to paper and do it. And then for you, a question, Sister Simone, your book is called Hunger for Hope. And if you don't mind, with the 5 minutes that we have left, I want you to filibuster. What is America? Who is America? Right now, people are like, this is not a democracy. This is a backsliding democracy. This is a white Christian nationalist nation that is implementing minority rule. What is giving you hope right now in 2022 America as we're besieged with so many challenges and so many fears?
Well, quite frankly, conversations like this give me hope. But I think the critical piece is that we have to touch the pain of our world, the truth of our world, the suffering of our world. And it's ironic, but true. It's out of touching the pain, not fixing it, not taking it over, not denying it, but out of facing the truth of it, is that I find in a spiritual sense, then hope emerges. Because what pain does is it puts us in solidarity with each other. I say, the key is to have my heart broken open. And then having my heart broken open, then I've got room for everybody. It's only when I'm protecting my heart, trying to keep it safe, not get hurt, that I don't have room for anybody. I become very judgmental. I become part of that distancing reality.
Can I ask you a question, sister, if you don't
Sure.
mind? Some people, when they acknowledge the pain, it becomes so overwhelming that they drown in it. How do you get from the point of, I need to acknowledge the pain, I need to be vulnerable, but now I have to use it to transform to the best version of myself and to heal?
Right. When I get overwhelmed, it's usually because I think I'm responsible for fixing it all. I think I'm in charge. And what I've learned is, and it's with the help of the therapist that you mentioned, Robin, that the reality is I just need to touch it to have my heart broken open and then do my part. And if we're in community, the whole reason for community is so we each have a part to play. And it's being woven into that connection, which can make the future possible, where I can have hope because I'm in solidarity. I'm not alone. The challenge for our democracy right now is I believe, is our hyper-individualism, and the fact that there's enough wealth among the top, I don't know what, 40%, that they can pretend like they don't need anybody. The truth is we need each other. And that's, for me, the breakthrough moment where we see America not as this beacon on the hill, rather it's us sitting around a campfire trying to struggle together into the future. So it's that relationships that are key.
Can I be juvenile and represent the juvenile segment of America and personalize it? And basically, I articulated what you just said and what Dr. Robin has said as we need a multicultural coalition of the willing. And I truly believe, or call it the ethnic Avengers, or if you like DC Comics, the Justice League. And I believe, just listening to what both of you are saying, this is my belief. I think God has given every single person something, some talent, some superhero talent, some gift, and it's all different. And I feel like once you find it and you lean into it, that's the best that you can do. Your job is not to do everything. Your job is, you can only control your own intentions and your own actions. That's it. I got 3 kids. I can't even control them. But I think if you use it, if you get the right intention and you have that talent, that superhero talent, whatever that is, and you do your best through your actions, at the end of the day, that's you showing up and doing your part in this multiracial democracy.
Absolutely. And it's such a great combination. Maybe we could just, we're coming to the end of our time. We don't want to go over, but maybe we could just each end with just a couple of little words about who is the America that we see through the eyes of our book, or through the words of our book. You sort of started that, Watch, which is what gave me the idea.
Which means Robin has to pick it up.
I think America can be something other than Babylon if we can participate in our own becoming. But we have to make that decision together, which is why we need to return to some of these first things like eating together, figuring out how to be in community. We all have a part to play, and we can do it if we can imagine the possibility of being together.
Look, I think America is this Zoom panel. I'm not just saying this to be cheeky or to be sentimental. I'm not a sentimental person. But if you look at the Zoom panel and if you look at the authors that are assembled, the different faith communities, different identities, this is America. Whether you like it or not, this has always been America. It is a multiracial experiment. It's an evolving rough draft. That's what makes it beautiful. That's what makes it messy. You don't have to agree with everything. You don't have to like everything, but you each live in this evolving, messy community. Whereas Robin said, at the very least, I can break bread with you. I went to an all-boys Jesuit Catholic high school. I'm a practicing Muslim. I'm a son of Pakistani Muslim immigrants. I come from multiracial California, and yet somehow I have not melted into anything, right? And so it is possible, but you need the intention and the action to do it. And you have to, last thing I'll say, because I know we're running out of time, you have to fight for it. You have to fight for it, because if you're paying attention, ladies and gentlemen, there are forces that want to constrict and restrict this story. And there are forces right here on the Zoom panel who are choosing to expand it. The only way this country survives if a Zoom panel or a dinner invite to Robin's house has these guests. It's the only way it survives.
Amen. And to those two comments, I would just add, and we need brave conversation where we have the courage of asking each other questions like we did tonight to find out, where are you? How do you see it? And then listening to responses and letting our hearts be affected. We need to be actors. All right. Thank you both so much. This was a great conversation. Okay, over to you, Janae. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sister Simone. That was a wonderful way to start this evening. If you remember nothing else, remember our real relationship and deep conversation that has true intimacy and true seeking to understand one another. I want to thank Wajahat, Sister Simone, and Dr. Robin for sharing your thoughts and your books. It's now my pleasure to bring in Reverend Ben Perry from Middle Collegiate Church to give a lucky listener signed copies of all 3 books.
Yeah, it's my absolute delight to be the person behind the curtain, if you will, tonight. And so I'm going to share my screen right here. And I have everybody who's in the room right now on a little spinner. And the way it's going to work is I'm going to click this spinner. We're going to get a name, and then I will contact you, and we will send you free copies of the books. So get ready. Someone's going to win. Ann Gilmore gets 3 books. Congratulations, Ann.
Thanks, Ben. Our second panel hosts 3 internationally known authors from 3 faiths who will, who will share the personal and prophetic as they discuss where faith leads us. Valerie Kaur is a Sikh activist and founder of the Revolutionary Love Project, who brings us See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love. Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, Roshi, Zen priest, fierce activist, and founder of the Center for Transformative Change, shares her bestseller, Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation. And Reverend Jen Butler, CEO of Faith and Public Life, takes back the Bible in her book, Who Stole My Bible? Reclaiming Scripture as a Handbook for Resisting Tyranny. Jen will lead off.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Janae. And hi, Valerie. It's so good to see you and Reverend Angel. I am so excited about how this panel was put together, because as I think about this title of Where Faith Leads Us, what I noticed about our books that I didn't fully grapple with before is that we're talking about, how our faith takes us into the world for liberation and to address these times we're in. But it also, our faith is integral to grounding us and giving us courage and spiritual practice in this moment. And I will say I've learned so much through each of your faith traditions about how I can more deeply practice my own. So it's really wonderful to be with a Sikh activist and a Buddhist activist, learning how you all do this in these times. I wanted to start us off. You all are super busy, and we have been in the streets together and in the trenches, really fighting for justice. What was the moment when you knew you had to write a book of all the things you're doing in the world, and then you decide you're going to write this book? So what was that moment for you?
Okay, I'll jump in. I'm here with, talk about being super busy. I'm here with my daughter. We have stickers and paper and markers, so I think all is going to be well. We'll see. I began writing this book when I was a college kid. I was a senior in college. I had just returned back from traveling the country in the aftermath of September 11th, when hate violence erupted on city streets against people of color and my community. So many of our people were on the front lines of that hate. Balbir uncle, Balbir Singh Sodhi, was the first person killed in a hate crime after 9/11. And so, Jen, I took my first book writing class in spring of 2003. And it was this book. It was like the stories I was writing were in chapter 2 called Grieve. And when I came out of college, I had my first book proposal, and I thought, okay, I've been entrusted with these stories. If America can hear these stories, if America can include us in how it sees itself, then perhaps that will be the beginning for our healing. I send it out, I get a stack of rejection letters. And perhaps if it was just my story, I would have stopped. But I kept living the stories and writing them, living them and writing them. And every few years, 2005, 2007, 2009, 2012, I kept putting out a new book proposal, and the responses were the same. There's no audience for this, and there's no voice in this. And so finally, it was like, my son is born, and it's 2016, and between the election and the inauguration, I write book proposal, 2016, Revolutionary Love is the Call of Our Times. And it was the sum total of all the stories I had carried forth with me like a treasure chest. And perhaps it took that long for someone like Chris Jackson to come to One World, and a Black editor who sees the proposal and says, revolutionary love is a cultural intervention, and the time is now. So he gave me my first breath of air. That little advance was enough for me to take a step back from the front lines. I took my family to the rainforest, and it was like taking my first deep breath since 9/11. Oh, I know, look at your hands. You're okay though. You want to show them your hands? It was in the rainforest where I learned how to breathe. And I began to write. And I realized I'd spent my life organizing around hate, and I wanted to spend the rest of my life organizing around love. And so I began to write what I discovered as the practices of revolutionary love. And I got pregnant with her. And I was like, okay, there's no deadline, like a due date. I cannot postpone this. I cannot ask for an extension. This is it. So we came back to the country, and it was sitting at this desk where I was writing, and getting to the final pages. And the final line was a letter to her. And it was, may joy be your lifeblood. And I kind of got up and immediately went into active labor, and 4 hours later she was born. So the book and the baby came into the world at the same time. Her name means Ananda, which means joy. So much of what my book is about how to labor for a more just and beautiful world with joy.
Wow, so beautiful. I'm so glad she can join us here tonight, since she helped birth the book, even as you birthed her. Reverend Angel, how about you?
Mute button.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to see you. It's good to see you both. It feels like we're both somehow always on screens and not somehow seeing each other as well. So I'm glad to see everyone. So Valerie, when you said you were coming out of school, I was like, wow, it's such big time difference. So 2013, 2012, Trayvon Martin was killed, and Black Lives Matter was born shortly after, when his murderer was acquitted, and sort of like, okay, yeah, that's a thing. And it's kind of, as Black folks, not that much of a new thing. And then scroll forward 5 years later, or 4 years, 2 years later, it was like 3 acquittals in a row, and we got up to Eric Garner. And there's this moment, and this is 2014, and now sort of conversations are percolating in a different way. That there was, I can't breathe, right, became this national call for help. And as a Buddhist teacher myself, and Lama Rod Owens were, navigating our lives as just as what it meant to be Black teachers in Buddhist circles, which are somewhat renowned for being quasi-progressive. And we realized that we were in this weird moment where we were sitting in the teacher's seat, which is unusual to begin with, but now there was this crisis, and a national crisis, and people that looked like us were the were at the center of that crisis, and that had not happened, where you had this situation where people were looking towards their teachers, but it was like, oh, but the teachers are them. And so it created an us versus them, or an us and them. I wouldn't say like versus, but it created an us and them. And it was very striking, because that was the conversation in the room. And it was clear that people weren't clear that they could have that conversation with us, or how to have that conversation with us. And we moved in different circles. Buddhism is not like one big world, just like Christianity is not one big world. There's very, very different streams and sects and schools and traditions and so on, and separated by entire countries. And but that was clear for us as Black people that were sitting in front of the room, so to speak. And that brought up a conversation with a magazine that's sort of well known in the Buddhist world, and they were like, "Yeah, like what is that for you?" So we had that conversation. I like to joke that it went what's called Buddhist viral, which means that was maybe 4 people saw it, and and so, but we were repeating the responses and the inquiry, like it was very clear that that people were curious in this way. That was this aha moment. And it's this, we had this sense of, oh, like this thing that's normal for us to be navigating, for us to be coursing through, Black people, Black men being killed in America is like nothing new to us. And yet the community of people that we were often in service to, or certainly a majority of the people, just by the nature of demographics of Western, so-called Western Buddhists or convert Buddhists in America, are far more often white. And no matter where you go, even if you feel like you're in a diverse community, which is different than what has been called heritage Buddhist, and we keep changing the name, but we are largely in communities and circles in which we are teachers to Western and convert Buddhists, and they are largely white, and it was clearly a surprise. And the fact that it was a surprise was worthy of conversation, and the fact that we were repeating the same thing so often was worthy of a conversation. And so inside of that, as I was listening to Valerie, it was a similar thing. It was like we're trying to get around what is missing here. Like how do we get here? How do we get to this location where that's a surprise? And what's been missing? Because certainly we're not the first people to have run into the killing of Black people. We're not the first generation. And what is different and what is missing? And that raised the question of conversations for us. And conversation not as like just something we talk about across the table, but I want to say Buddhist inspired conversation, which is something we understand like as a practice, right? As a presence, being with conversation in a contemplative way that allows what is arising to be felt and related to, rather than coursing past it. And that inspired the idea of Radical Dharma as a book that is about conversations. We were inspired particularly by Bell Hooks, rest in peace, and Cornel West. Their book is being unusual, an unusual pair of Black people, male and female, was breaking bread, and it was unusual because it was considered that Black intellectuals was an unusual thing. And so we mirrored the idea and the concept that here we were in this next generation of in these unusual locations, also male and female, also Black, but now queer, and now in a tradition that wasn't considered customary for Black people. And so we were transcending new boundaries. We were, taking it to its edges, and we thought about that as radical. And so the book is very much about how do we be fully in the truth, and how do we have conversations about it, and to do that as a practice, which we feel is both a conversation for Americans in particular, I mean Buddhists in particular, but also for America at large. And so that was the inspiration.
Oh, beautiful. These books are really lifelong journeys and lifelong songs for us, I'm noting. And I think both of you inspired me to reflect that sorry about that. This book comes really out of my childhood, I think, of growing up in the South and having the Christian right begin to define what Christianity was. And reading in the Bible that, Jesus, said his mission was to, bring good news to the poor and freedom to the oppressed. And yet I didn't see that Jesus around me. And so I went on this lifelong journey really to find and to pursue that way or that path, and had to go far and wide and international to find really that articulation of faith. And what finally really crystallized that I had to write all this down was around 2016, as we began to do a lot of advocacy against rising autocracy, realizing that as I, took to the streets and organized with other people, that what was informing my activism and what was speaking to me in those very intense moments was the scripture itself that I felt like I needed to reclaim. And so at one point, I decided to take some time off and write the book. And I was going to write a book along the lines of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, or Timothy Snyder's 20 Lessons from the 20th Century on how to resist authoritarianism. It's going to be like a very short little book of rules for progressive faith activism. And as you all know, I've spent a lifetime trying to rebuild this movement and do communication strategies and look at the politics of issues. And what I realized as I was writing the book, for one thing, it wasn't coming together. And I actually began to talk to Susan Barnett, who helped organize this call tonight. And she was really pushing me on, what is the motivation? Why do you want to, spend time writing this book in this busy year of 2022? And I, grew a little bit frustrated with her as I was like working with her, and Susan knows it because I was like, leave me alone, Susan. I'm tired, and I've taken time off to write this book. I got to get it done now. And what I finally blurted out was, my faith has been hijacked. I have to take it back. I have to reclaim this voice of faith. And people don't understand that the entire Bible is a handbook for resisting tyranny. The whole Bible is that, from Genesis to Exodus to Revelation. I wasn't taught it that way. She said to me, Susan was like, what? The whole Bible is a handbook for resisting tyranny? I've never heard of it spoken in that way. Jen, that's it. When you speak about scripture, when you speak about the book of Exodus and the women in Exodus 1 who organized the first multi-faith, multi-race coalition to take down a tyrant, when you speak about that, you really come alive. What you should do is just rewrite the Bible so everybody understands it. I was like, what are you talking about? I don't have time to go rewrite the Bible. And yet, as I began to reflect on some of these key texts that were coming up to me in the midst of my activism, and I began to meditate on those and use a practice called Lectio Divina to really meditate on the stories themselves. The stories became alive to me. They were mystical. I found myself rooting in those, connecting to spiritual ancestors as I walked in their footsteps, and realized what gave me hope was that I'm a part of a whole lineage of rebel women and rebel men and rebel people who have resisted tyrants throughout the ages and who have grounded themselves in spiritual practices and in our religious traditions to do so. And that gave me hope to move forward. It gave me spiritual practices to do that. And it connected me to a lineage of people who helped me understand that I could learn from them and that there would be people coming after me to actually carry on the tradition. So that's when I decided I had to rewrite the Bible, hence Who Stole My Bible, and reclaim it for resisting tyranny. I was also wondering from you all, how does your book answer this question of where faith leads us?
I'm just going to put a gratitude in this space before I dive into that question, because just being with you both is so electrifying for me. I feel like what's often invisible for authors or visionaries who come out solo is like that tapestry, that connectivity, that sisterhood, siblinghood behind the scenes. And you both have been crucial for me in my becoming and my writing and my speaking. And Jen, for you to reclaim Christianity. And it's a tradition that did a lot of damage for me as a non-Christian growing up in a conservative white town in California. So to see you reclaiming it in a way is like, it's medicine for someone like me who's not even in the tradition. And I thank you for it. And then Angel, I know you know this, but like I felt so much guilt when I first decided to leave the country to write this book. I thought I was only as worthy or as important or as impactful as my ability to like make myself suffer in order to serve. And you're the one who was like, my love, like you don't have to be in a state of constant siege all the time. Like, in fact, you don't have to just be in this state of like reaction and resistance. You can have spaciousness to play. You can dream. Like, what you need to go is go outside of the country so you can see it with new eyes. And then right from that space, that expansive space. So I'm back now. And Angel, I feel like I know now how to carry the rainforest inside of me. Like you know, like I know how to sink into that space, and I feel like that's the gift. Like I wrote this book to save my life, and now it's what will keep me laboring, keep me in the long run. And so how does it answer the question? It's all about reclaiming love, you know? When she was just first placed on my chest, I remember I was like sobbing and crying and shaking. I'm like, this is love. I'm falling in love, you know? Right? I was falling in love with you. But love is more than the rush, right? It's what happens afterwards. It's like my mom then next to me opening up her bag and taking out her dal and chol and proceeding to feed me, like feeding her baby as I'm feeding mine. And my mother, like she knew what I was just beginning to learn, that love is more than a rush of emotion. Love is sweet labor. Fierce, bloody, imperfect, life-giving, a choice we make again and again and again and again. And if love is labor, then love encompasses all of our emotions. You know, joy is the gift of love. Grief, all the grief that so many of us are carrying, that is the price of love. You grieve because you have the capacity to love well. Rage, we often think the opposite of rage is love. No, rage is the force we harness to protect that which we love. And when we choose to love beyond what evolution requires, when we love others, when we show up in front of our opponents with love, when we love on ourselves, who we too often neglect, that's what I call revolutionary love. Revolutionary love is the choice to enter into labor for others, for our opponents, for ourselves, to transform the world around us and inside of us. And I believe it's the call of our times, but it's an ancient call, isn't it? It's coursing through our scriptures and songs and stories. Love is this robust ethic. Bell hooks the idea that the love ethic should be the foundation of every arena of public life. I believe our very future as a human species, let alone as a nation, depends on whether we make good on that truth, on that promise. And so my work now is around, yes, anti-racism is the bridge. Beloved community is the destination. And if beloved community is the destination, then may we develop capacities within ourselves to be able to wonder, to say, you are a part of me I do not yet know, to be brave with our grief, to harness our rage, to listen across lines of difference, to reimagine, to let breath in, to let joy in. Those are all the labors of love. And I have to say, the one thing that's happened that's been new and beautiful is that in the last year, people have been self-organizing around the Revolutionary Love Compass in pockets around the country. So houses of worship and K-8 schools, advocacy organizations. And I keep thinking revolutions happen not just in those big, grand public moments, but in the spaces where people are coming together to inhabit a new way of being. And I believe that all the books, like each of your books, Radical Dharma, Who Stole My Bible, Waj's book, Jackie's book, all the books that you're going to be hearing today are seeding those communities of practice. So it's not just ideas, but ideas put into action. And if that is like, we need sound government, we need sound policy, but that culture shift, that consciousness shift is what I'm after over the next 20 years, the next 30 years, in this time of great transition. And so if folks are interested in digging into my work, it's seenostranger.com, where you can go to the Learning Hub, where you can put these tools into practice, or you can labor with joy too.
Reverend Angel, where does faith lead us in terms of your book? How do you answer that question?
Yeah, well, I also want to appreciate, you, Jen, for, I have these moments, all throughout the Auburn Fellows of like wishing, in some ways, I'm happy with where I am, somewhat trans or post-Buddhist in many ways. But how important it would have been for me at another time in my life to have somebody to reclaim and to write that Bible, that I heard spoken about, and that I didn't see expressed, or I didn't see the behavior around that feels so important. And Valerie, I think, I have told many a person, leave the country. Like I've told many a person, like, leave the country, especially Black folks writing about race, and trans folks, writing about homophobia, transphobia, anyone's like, you have to get out of it, right, to see it, so that you're not writing what you're not writing is like, it transcends it. It's not writing from it, right, and writing from our scars rather than our wounds. But that you took response, took the call, and like you actually did that is not something that all of us do. And I think that that makes a huge difference. Like, what do we do with the information that's there about rest, about repair? What do we do? And to answer your question, Jen, with those conversations, because we can have them, until the cows come home. We're not the first people that had these conversations. We have continued the work of Radical Dharma with work camps, and this year we're doing camps. They got cut off by the pandemic, of course, but circles and camps and conversations, like long form conversations, long retreats that people stay in. And so we're starting those up again. And what I think that it does for faith is it invites us to interrogate, like, what are you doing, right? What are you doing with those words? What are you doing with that ideology? The initial conversation for Radical Dharma was, yeah, you're in pursuit of the truth, Buddhist, but what truth? And what part are you leaving out? Are you leaving white supremacy out? Are you leaving, right, the instructions of the oppressor out when that serves you? Are you leaving toxic capitalism out? Are you leaving patriarchy, misogyny out of your inquiry into the truth? It's said often that the Buddha said that he taught suffering and the end of suffering. And similar to you, Valerie, I decided, like, oh, my people know a lot about suffering. I'm going to teach about liberation and the path to liberation. And so for me, that's the inquiry. Is your faith true to what Jen is talking about? Is your faith actually inviting liberation? Is it inviting conversations that lead to liberation? Is it inviting ways of being in the world that allow you to express radical and revolutionary love? So that is the work for me, and that is what it has to do with faith, is that it's not enough to say that we have faith. We have to verb our faith. We have to faith it. We have to do it. We have to have it show up. We can't just have it in scripture, have it in tomes, have it in books. They're wonderful. But if we don't, we can't just have conversations. If it doesn't shift the way that we are showing up in the world, then we are not partaking of the deep value and possibility for transformation, for transforming not just ourselves, for transforming our relationship to ourselves, to the so-called other, to love. And that I think is what we are all called to do. I think that's why we get to do something more than just drag our knuckles on the floor, is so that we can transform ourselves.
So beautiful. I know we need to wrap this segment, but I'll just maybe tack on to what Reverend Angel was just saying, that I dedicated my book to those brave and sometimes lonely Christians finding their way out of the wilderness and into the streets. And I say, may you find joy, may you find joy in reclaiming and resisting. And so I'm hoping folks will use this book to reclaim their faith, not let others hijack it or steal it from them or steal it from their communities, so that we can move forward with power and together in a multi-faith context, organize for a better country. I'll now turn it back over to our moderator.
Thank you so much.
It's a nice being with you all.
Thank you so much. That was so inspiring and underscores how much our faith and our religious teaching can inspire real change through love and resistance and liberation. Thank you, Jen, Valerie, and Reverend Angel. Ben, it is time to give away 3 more books and to give away 2 more books from the first panel to 2 more people. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Janae. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Anne, for pointing out that we were not being sufficiently democratic in our book giveaway system. So without further ado, I'm going to share the spinner again. And so first we're going to give away Waj's book, Go Back to Where You Came From. Spin the wheel. Rand Sylvander, you win Waj's book. And now we are going to spin for Sister Simone's book, Hunger for Hope. Carol, you win. So now moving into, hold on one second, I'm just gonna remove, try to make sure that we only give people, we're really sharing the love now. So we're moving into the spins for this last panel. So we'll start with Jen Butler's Who Stole My Bible? Tim Jackson. Sorry, Taryn, you were so close. And now we will spin for Valerie, Valerie Kaur's book, See No Stranger. Donna Sanders, See No Stranger is yours. And finally, we will spin for Reverend Angel's book, Radical Dharma. Goes to Jessica Tan. With that, I will kick it back over to Janae.
Thank you, Ben. So our third panel looks at the healing we inherit and explores with heart and scholarship the deep wisdom and strength of our ancestors. We're honored to have authors Dr. Yolanda Pierce, an African-American religious history and womanist theology scholar, who will share with us In My Grandmother's House, Black Women, Faith, and the Stories We Inherit. Cuban-American writer and podcaster Kat Armas brings us Abuelita Faith, What Women on the Margins Teach Us About Wisdom, Persistence, and Strength. And Lisa Sharon Harper documents 10 generations of her family story and a remarkable book named for her grandmother 10 generations back, Fortune. Her book, Fortune, How Race Broke My Family and the World and How to Repair It All. Lisa is going to lead us off.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate your leadership and moderation of our time, Janae. And hello, Dr. Pierce and Kat Armas. I have been fangirling the reality that we're actually going to have a conversation tonight, literally for a while, because we have never had a conversation, the three of us, but I've been following your work and I've had people literally, Dr. Pierce, I had one of my colleagues text me, emailed me. I think she was a part of a webinar you did on your book. And she was like, you've got to read this book. This is such a great book. So just so that you know, like the word is out.
That's great. That's great.
Absolutely. And the same thing for you, Kat Armas. I mean, your book, Abuelita Faith, is really breaking ground. It's helping people to see our faith stories in a new way, and also to see the roots that maybe we didn't even know existed, but the roots that are there and that can be seen more clearly through our family stories. So I want to start us off with a question. I was thinking about, how, and it's kind of amazing actually how they put this panel together. Everybody's been saying that, but it's still true. It's true for us as well. I was kind of amazed at how there have been a bunch of books that have been written by women of color recently that are looking back, right? Looking back to our ancestors in order to connect ourselves and our faith, to connect ourselves with our faith now and in today's world. So Dr. Pierce and Kat, both of your books, In My Grandmother's House and Abuelita Faith, you draw theological lessons from your grandmothers. I mean, I just thought that was both of you. That's kind of amazing. And explicitly so in your book, this is the purpose of your book. And in my book, Fortune, I tell the story of 10 generations of my family's story. And through that framework, reframe the story of America and our faith and how it's working in America. And so I'm convinced that the Spirit of God is doing something. Like, I really do believe that God moves messages into the world through writers. That's what God does. That's what the Spirit of God does. So I'm wondering, what do you think God is doing by releasing this stream of narratives that come from the margins and also from the past, from the ground, from our ancestors into the world? What do you think God's doing right now?
Wow, that's a great question. And so as a theologian by day and writer by night, so I really think about it in terms of what I imagine that the Holy Spirit is breathing in this particular space and time and environment and atmosphere. And so I feel like it's the breath of the Spirit that is about the recovery of stories that otherwise wouldn't be told, right? What I find most fascinating is that we are writing about quote unquote ordinary women, right? Extraordinary to us in so many ways, but these are not biographies of famous people. These are not life stories about, those kinds of folks who make their way into history books. Instead, this is about how ordinary women are doing the work of faith, passing it down from generation to generation. So in my denomination, we have church mothers. That is a church office. This is occupied by largely older Black women. And I watched them as I grew up, their faith, their joy, their peace that the world couldn't take from them. And I needed to tell their story. Nobody special to anyone except us, no famous names, but these ordinary women who showed up, and the way their extraordinary faith actually helped to raise me. And so that's what I love about what I think the Holy Spirit is doing. It's saying that it takes the most ordinary people to be the hands and feet of God.
Ooh, thank you so much. I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Pierce. And is it Dr. Armas? I don't want to.
Armas.
It's Kat. Okay.
Yeah.
So Kat, what do you think?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for asking that question. So I love what this panel is called, right? The healing that we inherit. And so when you ask, what is the Spirit doing? 100%, I feel like the Spirit is in the business of healing. White supremacy and whiteness wants to change, warp, distort history, right? But I feel like as Dr. Pierce, what you're saying, as ordinary people, it is ordinary people that make history, right? We tend to hear about the quote unquote extraordinary, the big stories and the big, and those, of course that's important too, but yeah, there's something about the untold stories that I think that's what's shaping and making history. And so I think that what we're doing, is that we're telling sort of that underside of history that whiteness and white supremacy, wants to distort and wants to suppress and wants to hide. And I think that it's in these stories of survival. And that's something that I talk about in Abuelita Faith. I say that Abuelita theology is a theology of survival, right? And it's in these stories of every day, what we say, lo cotidiano, and the everyday and the struggle and la lucha. It's that, sitting around the kitchen table doing theology, right? It's when the floor is being mopped and the coffee is being brewed. And, it's in that space where history is made and formed, and where resistance sort of stems up from the ground. And it begins with our grandmothers and with our ancestors. And so I 100% think that as this discussion is called a healing that we inherit, I think that is sort of the thread, the tetheredness that where we can find healing from things like white supremacy and whiteness and colonial ideology and all of the things that want to distort and destroy. I think that we are rebuilding and reimagining.
Wow, I love that. For me, when I was diving into writing Fortune, it was a 30-year research project. I kid you not, 30 years. And of course, I didn't start it thinking I was going to write a book. I started it just doing family research, literally. And then when I stumbled on the person of Fortune, and also her father, Sambo Game, and her mother, Maudlin McGee, and realized that her body absorbed the very first race laws, like the wrath, the terror of them on this land. In the second colony, the first race laws in the second colony, only 2 years after the very first race laws ever, I started realizing, whoa, this is not just my story. This isn't just my family's story. This is the story of America. And I think now, the story of America and race in America, I think now when I look back on it, I think that what I was attempting to do, and what I see this pattern in the stream of books, also including Cole Arthur Riley's recent book, right? This Here Flesh, she says the exact same thing, that she is actually developing a theology out of the lives of her father and her grandmother, like the same people, the grandmother, right? So I think there's a decolonization that's happening, a decolonization of in particular, in this case, Christian faith. When I think back to, and also to the American narrative, in the face of January 6th, right? In the face of the Trump presidency, in the face of white patriarchy trying to resurrect that lost cause and trying to win it this time, right? I really do believe that the Spirit of God is countering that through the stories of the abuelitas, through the stories of the grandmothers, through the stories that rise from the dirt, like from the ground, from the margins. So I'm inspired by it, and I'm going to be getting all of your books to see what God is doing in the world. So I have another question. Were there any unexpected discoveries that you found in the midst of researching for your books or doing the writing?
Yeah. So I love that you mentioned decolonizing, because I think that that is huge as far as, even the discovery that I, was doing in my writing. So I look at, of course, there's so many ways that we can decolonize, but in Abuelita Faith, I look at the notion of wisdom, and I kind of ask, like, what is that? And who gets to say, and I wrestle with wisdom. And so I think in my research, what was so incredible, I look at the Bible, and so I want to, trouble the narratives of Scripture, and I want to wrestle with these narratives of Scripture. And so much, Lisa, of what I found as far as wisdom, was birthed in so many of the stories of women, which are so short, right? Because the Bible is a book written by men for men. And so these tiny, short, what you would think are just sentences that we've been used to just kind of reading over or haven't been teased out for us, I found just so much richness, like, for example, the story of the Hebrew midwives. Of course, we know that they changed the course of Israel's history. But I really was interested in what was midwifery like in the ancient world. I recently gave birth. And so, of course, that was at the forefront of my mind, what was midwifery like? And to learn that midwives in the ancient world, they received wisdom from the land. They sort of put together these quote unquote potions and all this stuff that they literally from the dirt and from the land. And it was through that, they were considered spiritual healers and spiritual teachers. They were more than quote unquote just midwives, although that is not, there is no just midwife, but they were spiritual teachers and leaders, right? And this is not just the midwives, but so many women throughout history and throughout Scripture, that they had these roles, these spiritual authoritative roles. And it was all from wisdom, that, alternate forms of wisdom that nowadays we might overlook or dismiss, but throughout time and throughout history, women have been finding wisdom in the land and in their bodies. Miriam, who literally led the nation of Israel through the Red Sea and then took out her timbrel from her back pocket and led the nation in song and dance. And dance is a form of bodily wisdom, I argue, in Abuelita Faith, which has been, throughout cultures, right? So I think when it comes to decolonization and just the incredible things that I uncovered, it was this embodied land, soaked wisdom that women hold and have. And and it's been there, and we've been there, and we've been doing it. So
I love that. And especially just that term, like wisdom from the land, body and blood soaked. What? Okay. How about you, Dr. Pierce?
So many parallels and connections. So one of the things I really think that I learned as part of this writing process, which is different, so very different than the academic books that I've published as a practicing theologian, is to really think about generations. And I think that's why the grandmother figure comes up, because it is definitely about that wisdom, but it is about what we inherit across generations, right? To go 2, 3, 4, as you did, 10 generations back, and to think about the ways in which our DNA has evolved so that there are certain genetics that get passed down. There are certain aspects of our story that we have to discover, rediscover, uncover across generations. I think that for women of color, certainly for African-American women, stigma, shame, secrecy has been such a part of their lives. And so thinking about this recovery is to somehow deal with, how do we deal with the stigma and the secrets and the shame, right? And then the second piece for me that was like really, I don't know, it sort of blew my mind when I sort of wrote about it, but I always knew, is that it's also about the other mothers, right? It is about the aunties. It is about, we had a neighbor, Miss Priscilla, right? I had church mothers. I had people who were unrelated to me by blood. But the ways in which they intervened, the wisdom that they brought forth. And my argument, the reason I even wrote the book in the first place was my question. What if my grandmother was the greatest theologian I had ever known? Right? So as I spent my career teaching theology from lots of different perspectives and lots of different voices, it seemed to me that the most faithful weren't represented in the theology, right? So you read the Barton, you read the Calvin, or you read the Tillich, or even you read the James Cone, but the folks who show up, at least for Black churches, which are 85 to 90% Black women, where was the theology that they were doing on the ground represented in the theology that we read and that we teach? And so it was to really say these other mothers and grandmothers and aunties and big mamas and nanas and whatever the name is, right? Have so much to teach us, not just about their experiences and their stories, but that actually fit within how we do theological work. We have to, as what we say in womanist theology, we have to expand the hermeneutical circle so that the most faithful get represented. Their words, their wisdom, their lives, their stories, their understanding of God, of the Imago Dei, of who they are, of creation, of the eschaton. How Black women understand the end of life, how Black women understand the beginning of life, right? How we understand the value and the sacredness of life often doesn't get represented in traditional schools of theology. And this was an opportunity to bring that to an audience.
How awesome is that? Wow. Okay, so I was not planning on reading any portion of my book, but I'm inspired by what you just said, Dr. Pierce. I really am. And so I want to read this because I think it's actually a really great example of this theologizing of our ancestors, their theologizing. And I'll say that the two things that were surprising to me. One, and I can say them quick and then I'll read. One was that the surnames. So you're doing this research, right? I'm doing like all this research, 30 years of research. And the last 5 to maybe 8, not 5, last decade has been really, really focused on the earliest generations. So Fortune's generation, Maudlin McGee, going to Ireland and trying to figure out exactly where Maudlin McGee came from and all of that, right? So, but realizing that there was this huge community, not huge, but significant community of free Black families who were interacting, and my family, being indentured by many of these white noble families. So kind of understanding the movement of families and the reality that there was a noble and serf economic construct that the colonizers brought to this land in America, and that nobles and serfs construct was seen most clearly in the construct of indentured servitude and enslavement. And the indenturing families were the ones who indentured my families, the Day family, the Fuchs family, others. Now, when you look at those surnames, those are the surnames, not just Day and Fuchs, but others, those first colonizing families that were the gentry class, the ones who got land from England and were gifted land. Those are the people who are in the top, like C class in the Fortune 500 companies. That colonization, that human hierarchy of human belonging that was constructed in the very beginning of, in the foundations of this nation, is still holding today. It is still holding today. That blew my mind. All right, so, but I want to share this theologizing of the mothers and the mothers and the mothers mothers that happens for Leah Ankrum Ballard Williams, who was my fifth great grandmother. No, sorry, third great grandmother, the last enslaved woman in our family, and she was enslaved in South Carolina. And so Leah would taste loss again. This is actually now toward the end of the Civil War. You know, she's about to learn that she's actually been free, or not just the Civil War, but the Emancipation Proclamation. This, we talk about the impact of the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. And I say Leah would taste loss again, but for this moment, I imagine Leah standing still in the land she and her people had slaved for generations. On the day she hears that she is free, Leah raises her face to the noonday sun. She looks up to the trees, the leaves blowing and swaying overhead. Leah remembers the sound of the spirit songs in the brush arbor. She remembers her mother's voice in the trees. She listens close, and soon she hears the harmonies of her foremothers all the way back to the Yoruba and Hausa women. They sing to her from the trees, "Put on your crown, child, put on your crown." I came this night to sing and pray, oh yes, to drive old Satan far away, oh yes, that heavenly home is bright and fair, oh yes, but very few can enter there, oh yes, oh wait till I put on my crown, wait till I put on my crown, wait till I put on my crown, oh yes, if you want to catch that heavenly breeze, oh yes, go down in the valley on your knees, oh yes, go bow your knees upon the ground, oh yes, and ask your Lord to turn you around, oh yes, oh wait till I put on my robe, wait till I put on my robe, wait till I put on my robe, oh yes, and it strikes me that robe and crown, that is about the first page of the Bible. When we are all made in the image of God, we reflect the image of the King. So, and Queen, hello somebody. So the next question I have for us is, what was the moment that you knew that you just had to write this book? Dr. Pierce, would you go first? You are muted.
There you go.
There you go.
I don't know if it was one particular moment. I think it was a part of the work that I've been doing over the past decade, what it means to be a person who speaks to God in public, to be a public theologian, to do work out loud, right? My academic work, the justice work in a public way. And so this particular book, I think I gave birth to it out of this real sense that I wanted to make a contribution in honor and in memory of those women, of those elders, of those church mothers who otherwise don't find themselves in the historical record, right? Don't find their names, their stories, their movement from a former plantation in Georgia to domestic work in Brooklyn, New York, which is my grandmother's story and my grandparents who raised me. So it wasn't any one particular moment, but an outgrowth of what it means to take seriously my own faith, what it means to participate in public conversations about faith that are not co-opted by the religious right, to sort of stand flat-footed in honor of the men and women who birthed that faith in me that I've inherited, and to say that there is another way, that there's another way to be in this world. And so it demands us to be real clear about our intentionality, about who God is, because we're living in a world in which the systematic forces of oppression and marginalization and racism have silenced so many. So not one particular moment, but many moments of saying that I have to speak, even if my voice shakes.
Ooh, that's so good. Thank you. I love that. How about you, Kat?
Yeah. So, I wasn't raised in the white evangelical church. I was raised in a small immigrant Roman Catholic community. And, I found myself in my 20s, deciding that I wanted to begin formal, I say, quote unquote, formal theological education, not knowing, what that meant, or not knowing, very naively stepping into the world of, formal, elite, white evangelical, sort of spaces to try and learn about God. And it was almost immediately that I was met with a God that I, had no idea, knew nothing about, and I was told that this was the God who I was supposed to follow. And it was so wildly different from the God who my grandmother knew, and I, for so long, and I say so long, it wasn't that long, but it felt like centuries, for a few years there, I genuinely believed that my grandmother's faith wasn't legitimate, because it didn't look like what the dominant culture said was supposed to look, right? And so I, had existential crises, and culturally and spiritually, really believing that, my grandmother was not, quote unquote, saved, and so that really began this decolonization work within me, and, kind of reclaiming that abuelita faith, and reclaiming the faith of my ancestors and of my abuelita, and recognizing, it's funny, Dr. Pierce, you asked this question of what if your grandmother is the greatest theologian? Well, that is sort of the central question of my book. What if the greatest theologians the world has ever known are those whom the world wouldn't consider theologians at all, right? And that's my abuela. And so I just sort of, went back to my childhood and said, no, wait a minute, those moments in front of the altar, in front of the altar in my grandmother's house, her popular Catholicism, those moments were sacred, right? But in my quote unquote formal time in seminary, I was told that they weren't. And so it was a reclaiming and a decolonizing and a reconstructing of this informal, faith of our abuelitas.
That's fabulous. I wonder if, so we have only a few minutes left. Thank you so much, Ben. He's sharing with me the number of minutes we have left. I wonder if you guys have any questions that you'd like to share, you'd like to ask of any of the others of us on the panel.
So my question is about time.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there is so little of it. And yet we are doing many other things in addition to writing. And so I really would love to hear how you all are balancing what it means to write, to put yourself out there as writers, as authors, to do the other work that I know that you're doing. And how do you find the time to both nurture this gift, which I think is holy and sacred, the ability to write and have other people read your words, with all of the other things that you are also doing at the same time?
That's really, really good. Kat, do you want to jump in there?
I have a newborn, so I have no idea. Really, I really have no idea.
That's what I asked. I was like, how?
I hear you. I don't have a newborn. I have a little puppy.
Same thing.
Man's time too. I will actually, what I'll say, I will say that in order to carve out the time to even write the book, and now to carve out the discipline of continuing to write, even if stuff is not, I'm not even trying to publish it, I'm just trying to write. I started a writing group, and that writing group, and so I'm thinking about Dr. Robin, who said she's looking, or they're looking, forgive me, they're looking for a writing group. I want to invite every single person on this thing, and anybody watching who is a writer, come one, come all, every Saturday morning, we get together for 4 hours and we write. And this is called the Global Writers Group. And the first 3 hours are writing, and the last hour we share 3 minutes of our work and get 1 minute of feedback. And now we're actually upping our game, and we're starting quarterly workshops of our work. So we're going to get deep feedback on a good piece, 4,000 word piece, up to 4,000 words once a quarter, and have even a showcase once a year. So come. I do think for me that works, setting aside the time, making it regular.
I just want to say this one quick thing, that I heard this spoken word from a fellow Latino, and one of the things that he said, which was so beautiful, as he said, many of our communities, right, our communities of color, we write at night, we write in our sleep, we write, and it was like this beautiful thing, because and I just finished my manuscript for my second book, and I have this devotion on dreams. And it really felt like this sort of sacred, we write in our dreams, we write in our sleep, and we write, we excavate these memories of our ancestors. And so I have found myself, literally going to sleep intentionally, wondering, am I going to dream? And I hope that I dream. And, what's going to come to me in the middle of the night when I wake up to, to feed my kid, who's still waking up multiple times throughout the night. And, you'll be surprised how much I do jot down, in those wee hours at 3 o'clock in the morning, when my mind is sort of in that space that some things don't make sense, and some things, but things come out of that. And so right now in this season of life, I'm writing in my sleep and I'm writing in my dreams.
I love that. Keep writing. And I mean, really take those dreams and write your dreams. You just keep writing it'll come. It'll come. Do you have any questions, Kat?
Well, I think for me, one of the things that I'm sort of wrestling with is, and I wrestle with this in Abuelita theology, and I know both of you are scholars, is this tension between formal and informal, right? The formal theological space and the informal Abuelita space. And that's something that I'm constantly wrestling with, that tension. And so just wondering how you all hold that tension between, the academic world that sometimes wants to eat us up and, chew us up and spit us out, but also sort of reclaiming that space and elevating the untold and the quote unquote informal.
I love that. That's a great question, because it's something I really think about quite a bit. I'm an academic. I'm a full professor. I'm an academic dean of an institution. And I always think about that. I'm learning as I mature, as I become more comfortable with myself, that I write and I let God do all of the rest of it, which is to say that we create this distinction between formal and informal, or the sacred or the secular, or whatever other binary, that we bring to bear. I write and I hope and pray that the work is accessible to anyone who comes to it with an open heart and an open mind. And so I think that part of our responsibility, knowing the 3 books that we represent, is that it is steeped so much in our training and in our education, but it is also open and available for everyone. And that we actually need more writers who can do that, who can take those big terms, soteriology or eschatology, and actually say, this is how it shows up in the world, particularly for women of color. So I love for us to think about how we're doing away with those kinds of binaries, so that it's just good writing, as opposed to writing for the academy or writing necessarily for a different kind of public.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pierce. And thank you, Kat. I'm going to wrap our time. And thank you so much, Janae, for coming on and reminding us we have a whole thing here. Thank you all.
No worries. It was such a joy to listen to the 3 of you. It touched me and resonated so strongly when I think about my grandmother, Hilda Donald, who definitely was one of those theologians who practiced her faith in beautiful ways. And so Lisa, Yolanda, and Kat, I want to give a special thanks to you for very much touching my heart. And I know that our listeners are eager to see who wins the next 3 books. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ben.
It's giveaway time. I'm really leaning into my Vanna White here. So here we go. We've got some more books to give away. Our first spin is going to be for Lisa Sharon Harper's book, Fortune. The Amelie, this time it is you who wins. And now we are going to spin for Yolanda's book, In My Grandmother's House. That will go to Giuseppe Morelli. And finally, Kat's book, Abuelita Faith. That is going to Doug. So congratulations, winners. And I will kick it back to Janae, and we will have our final panel.
Thank you, Ben. And congratulations to all the folks who won. So this is our last panel. And as we mentioned at the start, and it definitely bears repeating, there are schools in 26 states that are banning books. So this is an assault on our children's education, and it should scare each and every one of us. So the next panel is going to introduce you to 3 wonderful children and young adult authors, including one who has, yes, been banned. So for the kids, here are 3 books for a better future, featuring Simranjeet Singh, who tells the exuberant true story of Fauja Singh, who became the first 100-year-old to run a marathon. Simran is executive director of the Aspen Institute's Religion and Society program, and he's got a new book for adults about to be released called The Light We Give, How Sikh Wisdom Can Transform Your Life. We also have Jordan Theory with us, a documentary filmmaker, activist, and storyteller, whose book, A Kid's Book About Systemic Racism, adeptly tackles this tough topic. And last but certainly not least, we have Jamia Wilson. Her book, This Book is Feminist, is a must-read inspiration for young people seeking to understand that the personal is political. Jamia is vice president and executive editor at Random House Publishing. And yes, a book highlighting her as an author was banned by a school district in Pennsylvania. Jamia, we invite you to start the conversation.
Hello, thank you so much for bringing us all together. It's been amazing to hear everybody speak tonight. And I feel that I have the unique experience and blessing in my life to be on both sides of the desk as an editor and midwife of other people's books, and also as a writer and author. And that experience of being on both sides of this has really been a gift in terms of being able to conjure empathy for authors and their creative experience, and then channel that into helping people as they are on their publishing journey, but also deepening my belief in the importance of reading and free speech and voice as a way to resist white supremacy, patriarchy, and all of those other social ills that we're all trying to heal and transform. So I'm just really honored to be together with my fellow panelists who I admire and respect. And I love that we are in a club of banned people. I also have another book I was a part of that was banned in my home state of South Carolina, which felt like a real full circle to have that experience as well. But what also emboldened me in that experience was that radical librarians wouldn't stand for it. And so I just wanted to also use this time and space to thank and bless the librarians, our MVPs who aren't talked about enough, who are the ones who deliver these books to the people who need them with love and help people feel less alone in the world. So I was wondering, Simran and Jordan, if you could speak a bit about your books and what it means to you in this moment to be putting your books out into the world.
I'll take it, Jordan. Thank you, Jimmy. This is a really cool conversation for me. I have to say, because I love y'all's books, and I have them at home, and my kids read them, and I'm so grateful for them. And it's not often you get to, or at least that I have the opportunity to have a conversation like this. So this is a fangirl moment for me. So thank you both. And yeah, I mean, I would say that for me, more than anything, having these books out in the world now is most meaningful as a parent. I have 2 young girls. I grew up always loving children's literature, even when I was supposed to be way too old and way too cool for it. But I've always loved it. And I think once my older daughter was born and I started looking at what was out there, it felt like not much had changed from my childhood. That's so many of the conversations that we had at home around what life looked like and what culture looked like and what it meant to be safe. Like no one else was really talking about that. Those stories weren't being told still. And so to be in conversation with the two of you where those hard conversations are being opened up in a way that's really beneficial for my children. That's what really inspired me ultimately to write children's literature, and it's why I'm so touched to be in conversation with both of you. Like these are the things that I want to be able to talk to my kids about. There aren't very many and very good vehicles for opening up those conversations, and that's what your books do for us. So thank you. To you, Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all those sentiments. Thank you, Simran. I think for me, all this happened. It's just so crazy because basically, as soon as my book came out, is when they started banning books and really bringing this misinformation around critical race theory in this CRT fight. It's an honor to just be amongst the other authors that have written about systemic racism, systems of oppression for children, especially over the last several years. And for me, I mean, I wanted this book to go out to kids like me, right? I wrote it with myself as a 9 or 10-year-old in mind. I'm really grateful that it's resonated with Black, white, Latinx, Asian American families. So it's just been an incredible honor, and it's a compliment to all the other real, I want to say real, but activism, right? A hands-on direct organizing work that I do. So I'm just excited because the kids are loving these books. They want the content. They're thirsty for the content. And to your point earlier, Jamia, like the teachers, the librarians are risking their careers, now sneaking these books into their classroom. And so I want to just acknowledge them as well and pay respect to them and acknowledge that the risk that they are taking to continue to make sure our kids get this education and get the truth. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I love what you are saying about truth. I feel that we're in a time where there's so much misinformation, intentional confusion, gaslighting about abuse at a systemic level, et cetera. And I feel that my calling to resistance is to put books out into the world that uphold the voices of truth tellers. And I wanted to hear from you about the kinds of truths that you hope to illuminate and amplify through the pages of your books for the next generation. And I will say, for me, empathy is always at the heart of it, because the sort of narcissistic underpinning of all of the things that I think need to be healed in our world comes from a lack of empathy and it being normalized. So I'm really curious what that is for you in terms of the kinds of truths that you are conjuring as well.
Well, if I understand the question, I mean, for me, I was nervous when I started the process a little bit in working with the publisher, not because, I mean, they're a relatively new company, kids company and my friend is the founder, but still it's a kids book company, right? So in going through that writing process, I was like, am I allowed to say genocide? Am I allowed to, right? And so I was maybe a little bit surprised that they were like, yes, right? Like all of it, all of it, don't hold back anything. And I'm so grateful to be a part of this company and to publish under their name, because they're really about just telling the truth and not concerned about the, financial repercussions or what have you, because they want the truth out there, and they don't want to continue to perpetuate that cycle of softening, watering down the real history of this country, and the real present of this country. It's not just historical, right? So with that, I got to tell my truth in my book about being harassed, terrorized by the police. I got to tell my truth about being pushed out of school. I got to tell my truth about sort of the media that I consumed and how it affected me. And I got to tell the truth about the genocide in this country, the exploited labor, and slavery, of course. I mean, that gave me courage too, for my other creative works. I'm also a filmmaker. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thanks.
Yeah, and I have like 5 or 6 follow-up questions for you, Jordan. So I'm gonna try and be disciplined, but I'm also going to try and hijack the conversation after my response, Jamia, just as a heads up, so I can ask a question that I'm super interested in to hear about from the both of you. For me in writing this children's book, there are a lot of different ways in which I could answer this question about truth telling. And one of them that's really, I mean, something that I've been reflecting on since it's come out really is, it's picture book biography about somebody else, right? It's not about me, but in so many ways, this story has felt so personal to me. And I've been really attached to it. And part of it is easy to explain, right? It's that this is about a person who has inspired me and has changed my life. And in many ways, this was almost like I wanted to give a tribute to him. And I wanted other people to know about his story because he's so incredible. And he has the kind of life experience that there's so much we can all learn from, and empathy is a big part of that, and intersectional awareness is a big part of that for me, and I'm happy to talk about that. But something that I haven't really thought so much about before in terms of the truth of this story, it's that I'll say it this way, I knew of this person. I started running marathons because of him, and there is a lot that sort of changed in my life because of that experience. And so I was like, okay, cool. Let me write this book about this person who has accomplished this incredible feat. But then as I got to know him, it was this experience of really digging into some of my own biases about what a hero could look like. And on the one hand, I'm coming in and saying, well, let me show kids that people who look like me can also be heroes. And that was very explicit for me. I wanted to do that, and it had been something in my mind for a long time. But the more I learned about his life, right, he dealt with disability as a child. He's illiterate. He never learned to read or write. He's an immigrant and doesn't speak a word of English. And those 3 particular things, each of them for me, as I was lifting him up as a hero, I was like, oh my God, those are all biases that I have about what our heroes are. I don't think about people with disabilities as heroes. I mean, I never have. And same with education and literacy. So anyway, to me, that was like a kind of truth telling that wasn't even just for kids. It was for me, and in a lot of ways that I didn't expect in the process. And it was really powerful. I mean, humbling, but also really, really a powerful moment for me. So, okay, now I get to ask my question since my mic is still on. And one of the questions that's really interesting to me, everyone's told me as I was getting into children's writing, don't be so explicit. And it's not that I was hiding words, but they would say tell these, share these ideas through stories. But both of your books are very explicit, and they're direct, and the truth telling in them is a very sort of in your face kind of truth telling. And I'm wondering about the if you felt like that was a risky decision, or if you felt like that was the only way you could really do it, or if that's how kids need to hear it. But yeah, I'm really wondering about that choice of how you approach that style in your book.
So I love this question. I have received reviews from some parents or critics who say that I'm not writing for the age level, or that, you know, some of the words are too complicated for older children or younger children. They shouldn't be accessing this material. And I kind of chuckle because I think one of the reasons young people who are my readers connect with me is because I respect the intelligence of my readers. I was one of those kids who was really inquisitive. I always ask questions. One of my children's books, Big Ideas for Young Thinkers, came from the fact that I was told I asked too many questions. And now I want to tell those adults who told me that I talked too much and I asked too many questions, I want to say, well, you know what? I made a career out of it. Thank you so much for discouraging me, because that joyful, defiant spirit in me decided to make something out of it. And that is, so whenever I see that, I just get fueled to kind of up the bar in terms of respecting the intelligence and the integrity of my readers. You know, spiritually, we know that young people and the child's mind is very powerful and pure, and they see through so many of the isms that we're trying to dismantle before the conditioning sets in. So there is also a strategic reason why I have chosen this space to focus most of my own writing in around social emotional learning, but also to say the right to question and that spark in you, do not extinguish it, conjure it, fuel it up. And as someone who feels like there was a lot of energy in the church and in institutions I was in to squelch that in me, I want those children to know they're not alone, that you are smart. They want to extinguish your fire to keep themselves warm, and you should continue to be who you are. And I try to model that in my writing. And I've received feedback from young people who see that. They say, you talk to us like a big sister. And it's funny for me as an only child, but that's kind of the voice that I write to. And a big part of it is that's healing that 8th grade part of myself that is still dealing with that trauma by writing a voice that is really smart, kind of Black girl nerdy. I mean, not just kind of, really. So awkward Black girl, you know, I felt like that show was written for me. And those are my people. And I just accept that, you know, I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea, and I'm cool with that. So as my mom used to say, since we're in a faith group, she said, you know, they tried to crucify Jesus. You're not going to be for everyone. And I really kind of think about that every time it happens, that I want my readers to know, I think you're smart enough to look up this word. I think you're smart enough to understand the nuances and the complexity of this concept. And I know they're smart enough.
Yeah, I think for me, it's similar in that, you know, I used to teach 4th grade, so I know the range in which a 9-year-old or 10-year-old can read and understand concepts that, you know, a 9th grader can easily, often, right? And for those that are younger, also, like, the guidance for my book is that this, you know, if you're reading to this young kid, it should be read with an adult. Because it's a kid's book, it's very short, and there's a lot of context that's missing, right? So, you know, we're encouraging people to have these, not just reading books, but having conversations, because that's where the real understanding comes through. And in the conversations that I have with parents is the thing I push for is modeling learning and inquiry, and saying, I don't know, let's find out together. Because, you know, I mean, this book is just as helpful for most of the parents as it is for the kids, and understanding what systemic racism really means. So I guess challenge and invite them to, like, really go on that learning journey with their kid and model that for them, instead of avoiding having discussion because you're nervous about not knowing answers to the questions they may ask.
I love that. The avoidance of having a discussion, that really is the crux of it. I feel that. Thank you for saying that. That's one of the reasons why I write that. I I had this one review, and they always tell you not to read the reviews, right? All the things I tell my authors, I do those things myself. I read those good read reviews, even though I know that it can not be fun. And one time there was someone who said she didn't like my book because I had the question, is there a God, or what is God in the book? And I put all these different viewpoints of how people see God. And she just said, I don't want my children asking that question. This is not acceptable for our home, even though I think it was a well-written book. And I remember just thinking, that's so sad that you're so afraid, because they will feel that. And there will be a time where that might be a point of disconnection. That my own explorations of that question led me to have a deeper faith and exploring other faiths. So I just really appreciate you saying that. And I wanted to end by asking you both a question, which is, why is your book, and the book that you're focusing on today, why is this a book that you want a child to read right now?
I mean, to go back to your point about empathy, Jamia, I mean, it's been to sort of also speak to the point about intersectionality, and I think some of the lessons I've learned through the life of Fojia, right? It has so many of the core qualities that I want to instill in my own kids, right? Like perseverance and hard work and believing in yourself. But the empathy piece to me is, I feel the same way, that this is at the root of what's missing in our world right now, and it keeps us from finding happiness. And if I want my kids to be happy, I really want to instill empathy in them. And what I've come to believe, and this is, I think, part and parcel of Fojia's story, is that if we can learn to see the humanity in the people who are most different from us, or at least who seem most different from us, then we can learn to see it in everyone we meet. And that belief for me is part of the spirit of selecting the story and bringing it forward. And it's also, I think, what comes out through reading the story, not because it's in your face, but because you can't really avoid it. And so it's implicit, but it's not hidden. And I just loved what you said about that, Jordan. The privilege of being able to avoid these conversations is a big part of why we're in the mess we're in right now as a country. And so that to me is a big motivation behind the story.
I think for me, for a kid's book about systemic racism, there's just, I just think it's a unique resource for kids, because there's a lot of books about racism. There's a lot of books about kind of like, the civil rights movement and other things, but trying to access resources that really share the big picture about why racism, why these inequities, these disparities sort of exist today, and they go back hundreds of years. That's different than reading a book about civil rights, right? Like that's different than reading a book about the Civil War or the Buffalo Soldiers, what have you. It's to help a kid process and understand why, my neighborhood looks this way and the neighborhood next door looks very differently. And the people who happen to be brown, the people there happen to be white. They don't really talk about that in school. And so I think this book helps kids understand that from the phenomena that they're seeing in the media to what's in their day-to-day lives, and those disparities, those color lines, that are kind of hidden. Understanding that, and kids will help kids, right? And it'll help them avoid, I think, also like the pitfalls of like making assumptions about people and where they come from or why they're in the situation that they're in, and also making assumptions about themselves and who they are. So that's why I think this book is important for kids to read, and why I wrote it.
Thank you so much. I could talk to you both all day. I know we're at time. I just want to thank everyone who's listening, and to say, when you buy your books, please support independent bookstores that are owned by people of color and by non-binary people and by women. There are MVPs, and your support of those stores matter. And if you want to order online, you can order through bookshop.org, and those proceeds will go to those independent bookstores. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a blessed week. And thank you to my wonderful panelists.
Thank you, Jamia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simran, Jordan, and Jamia. That was wonderful. And the little girl who loved libraries is just singing right now inside of me. So I want to turn it back to Ben for our last round of signed book giveaways and for a special bonus, because not only do we have signed books from these 3 authors, we also have another 3 books as well. So the first is from Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis, her new book, Fierce Love, A Bold Path to Ferocious Courage and Rule-Breaking Kindness That Can Heal the World. Her children's book, You Are So Wonderful, and best-selling author Brian McLaren has donated a signed copy of his brand new book, Do I Stay Christian? A Guide for the Doubters, the Disappointed, and the Disillusioned. So Ben, I'll turn it over to you.
Amazing. We're in the lightning round now. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to share our screen here. We're back to our spinner. And so this will be a spin for Brian McLaren's newest book. That is going out to Jane Lauer. Jane, congratulations. Spin it again for Jackie's book, Fierce Love. Charlotte, you are getting a copy of Fierce Love. And then we're going to spin it for Jackie's book, You Are So Wonderful. Harvey, you get a copy of You Are So Wonderful to read to yourself or to any kid in your life. And now we are going to move into this final panel. So I will spin for Jamia's book. This book is Feminist. That is going out to Taryn Glenn. So you won that one, Taryn. Now I'm going to spin for Jordan's book, a kid's book about systemic racism, or a kid's book on systemic racism. That is going out to Lisa. Congratulations, Lisa. And finally, we are rolling for Simran's book, Values and Keeps Going. That is going out to Kim. Congratulations.
Thank you, Ben. And thank you to all of our authors for sharing your heart, your humor, your wisdom this evening, and for generously donating your books. Now, we have a few closing thoughts from Reverend Jackie, again, via video. But after that, you can buy all of these books at the Strand Books, and we'll give you a link as soon as the video is over.
All right, friends, that's all for now. Thank you so much for coming to be with us tonight. We're so grateful to our authors. We hope that you will follow them, that you will purchase their books, that you will read the books for yourself, perhaps in a group with your friends, that you will read to your children, that you will help them to understand that the words of others is a window into their soul, into their worldview, into their lives. And it helps us remember that we are inextricably connected one to the other. In the spirit of Ubuntu, we are who we are because of who all of us are together. So I am wishing you a blessing tonight of just how wonderful you are. My children's book, You Are So Wonderful. Just because you're you, no one else has a smile like you, has eyes like you. No one else has your perspective. No one else has your life experience. You are unique and fabulous and amazing. And we need your voice and your activism in this movement. So dig deep into someone else's story and come on and let's do this thing together. Wishing you love and peace. Good night.
Again, remember, you can buy all of these books at Strand Books, and you can you can reach Strand Books and the link to find all these books through Middle Church. So www.middlechurch.org/events/books for a better world, with dashes in between each word. Hopefully Ben can put that in the chat. Please, please, please support these authors. And as Jamia said, through an independent bookstore, if you can, like Strand Books, buy their books. We'll also post this on YouTube, and it was streaming live. So spread the word so that other folks can see it. Happy reading, and thank you again for attending Books for a Better World.